Welcome to Reality Bytes Radio on the 11th of June 2015, the day of this year's Bilderberg meeting starting. It always starts on a Thursday, and we're going to be discussing that tonight with our guest, Alan Watt. Can you hear me, Alan?
Yes, I can, yeah.
Loud and clear, great. Bilderberg starts today, the usual host of, what would you call them, politicians, celebrities, CEOs, all the rest of it, Big Pharma, Google, etc. There was an article in the Telegraph earlier, or late last week, discussing this as being the event that all top politicians and CEOs wanted an invite to, as if it was kind of some kind of exclusive club. Mm-hmm. And it's part of the whole normalization process of Bilderberg, I guess, and that they're making it out to be this wonderful thing that if your politician's invited to it, then he must be good. He must be an excellent politician or something. Another thing that the article stated was the people who hadn't been invited this year, and they stated that the previous head of NATO hadn't been invited, the previous head of BP hadn't been invited, but what they didn't say was the current head of BP had been invited and the current head of NATO had as well. Lies by omission type of thing. But many people in the alternative movement will be following this now, or the alternative media will be following this right now. I'd say that the vast majority will be fixated on this thing, and having been at one myself and seen the circus that it is, and was particularly that time, I think it was possibly the first one that had been kind of made into this kind of public thing, and they tried to bring it out into the open to make it seem like it was benign. And to watch the Guardian newspaper and their friends controlling all the media events, all the people who were getting interviewed had to go through them, apparently. Most of us ignored that and just went after them anyway. But Charlie Skelton in particular, who is by his own admission, and he's quite proud about, a hardcore pornographer, admitted in his Guardian column that weekend of Bilderberg that he was acting as a liaison between the media and Bilderberg, so he was actually working for them. And he seemed to think that it was okay that Bilderberg took place and it was all secret. See, that was the only problem. It was all secret. And I put it to him that if Henry Kissinger came down and said that he wanted to wipe out 95% of the population, that would be all right with it. And he said, "Oh, no, I don't mean that." I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And he didn't answer the question. But this is what we're being led to believe, that Bilderberg is some kind of exclusive secret meeting. And I've come to the conclusion it's just a smokescreen. A couple of years earlier, 3 years earlier, myself and a colleague were at the Trilateral Commission in Dublin. Yeah. And on the Sunday, which was the last day of the meeting, I mean, there was virtually no security there whatsoever. You could be right at the front gates of the hotel, and there were a couple of police officers. That was it. And on the last day, the Sunday, we just walked right in and had a confrontation with David Rockefeller. And it was then you kind of start thinking, well, if I can get that close to this guy, he isn't that important. Mm-hmm. So the whole this farcical massive security operation that they put around Bilderberg is I think, just to feed into the, we'll call it conspiracy theory idea that it's all hush-hush, secret, and they're talking way above your station. You don't need to know what they're talking about. Whilst, of course, the other 364 days of the year, there are numerous other meetings taking place across the world that nobody hears anything about.
That's right. There's no doubt about it, though. I mean, the system we live in is vastly different from the one you're born to believe exists around you and is normal. We know, for instance, that the Trilateral is a specialized section of the CFR, and the CFR is just a branch of the Royal Institute of International Affairs. And we know, too, that from admissions of members of the CFR and so on in the US, that everybody wants to be in it. It's an exclusive club that you must be invited into. And it's from all walks of control, you might say, from media, banking, the military, all of these things combined basically. And so remember, most folk are in their particular line of work because they want promotion and they want to get up there and kind of stardom, you might say. It doesn't matter if it's journalism or acting or anything else. That's the human nature that we have and we're born into. So if you can get invited into these exclusive clubs, you certainly will have eventually be vetted. You're vetted long before you're invited into them. And you're tested too. You know, if you were in some exclusive bar somewhere, or your private club, gentleman's club in London, you'll be approached and questioned, you know, very, very subtly to get your opinions on things before they'll see you're okay to be invited into this. What do you think of this? What do you think of that? And if you're with basically an elitist agenda, then you might get invited into, and if you can keep a secret. The whole world works on combinations, you should call them combines, of very powerful people who pool the resources, their finances and so on, and benefit off the masses. That's the history of the world. And it's still going on today. So I'm really surprised that people are kind of shocked to find out that maybe it's because this whole brainwashing idea that you're living in a democracy really works when people they really believe it. But nothing is further from the truth. There's never been democracy. It's all run by combinations of powerful people. And once you get into a club, it's much like everybody's seen the movies on the mafia and so on. And the mafias would eventually fight intercity for turf and territory. And eventually they'd form combinations too. And the leaders of the different gangs would get together in a combination and agree how to split up the city for the wealth and the loot and extortion they're going to get out of it. And it would work for a while as long as no one got too greedy. Well, it's much the same with the lead of the world. There's a big gang that runs the world of psychopathic money grabbers, you might say. And they come up with all these wonderful schemes, not by themselves, of how to loot the planet to even enhance their wealth and their power and control forever. But they get all the academia on board as well. Every professor in academia wants to be members of these particular groups and clubs, you see. So this elitist club, there's no doubt about it. But I think each member, for instance, in the Royal Institute for International Affairs, CFR, Trilateral, and the same with the Bilderberg, they only give them about 10 to 20 minutes max to speak. Now, how much can you say as a specialist in any particular area in 10 to 20 minutes? On such big global projects? It's almost impossible. It's almost like a meeting place where they get to meet each other and suss each other out, in other words, too. And in fact, it's probably more of a place where they meet each other, and the ones that are a bit higher up than the newcomers will say, why don't you meet me in New York next week at so-and-so club, and we'll have a long chat. Or you can come and stay in one of my residences or something like that, and then you put your real agenda to them. That's what it's really turned into, as opposed to what its initial purpose was to be for the Bilderberg, which was to discuss how to bring the economy through the Cold War era and keep the economy going during the arms race and all of these kind of things. And, of course, make sure their own investments in the arms race were going to really get all the contracts. So it's just another big elitist club to make sure that they and their progeny forever and ever dominate what the world is, has been, and will be in the future, which will be a vastly different society than exists today. If you look at all of the incredible meetings going on, as you say, year-round through the United Nations. Now, the United Nations, and every department in the United Nations is subservient to this same elite that set up the United Nations. It was the Royal Institute for International Affairs that set up the UN, or the League of Nations, and then the United Nations. Every department underneath it, they set up the Bank for International Settlements to manage the whole financial system of the world. And the International Monetary Fund they set up, the Overseas Economic Development Corporation, which every country that signed on to the UN had to use, where they put their taxpayers down to borrow money from as a guarantor to pay off loans, which they then give out to countries abroad, where they put their own big industrial complexes, private complexes. Knowing those third world countries will always fail, in the payment schemes, but the guarantors like Britain, Canada, the US, and everybody else are signed on to pay off the debt. It's a fantastic scam because all money comes from the masses of people, basically. It's all through taxes.
Yeah. As I said earlier, that Telegraph article mentioned the people who weren't invited that year, and those who couldn't make it because of prior commitments. Now, I would suggest if you were invited to the Bilderberg group, all prior commitments would be out the window. So,
they would be, unless you were on your deathbed, yeah.
so they obviously, they weren't invited as such or asked to come at all. But some of the ones that were mentioned just happened to be at the G7, which is taking place in Germany, right next door to where the meeting's taking place.
That's why they timed them so close together. Yeah. They were definitely timed this year to be a week apart, sort of thing, in the same place, same area.
Yeah. So I'm sure some of these people that weren't invited ended up having their private meetings somewhere else.
Yeah, they would do, absolutely. This is what I'm saying. People think that if these folk don't meet together, then they won't get what they want. But that's rubbish, because these individual people who attend these meetings, the actual big players, are meeting groups across the whole planet, as you say, 365 days a year. So they don't have to, it doesn't all hang in the balance on this one meeting at all. No.
As far as many people in the so-called alternative movement believe it does. And they've been led down that path over the past few years, maybe 5 years or so, as far as I can be, to believe that this is it. I mean, in terms of the difference between this and the Trilateral Commission meeting, which is possibly more important, I'm not sure. But as I say, the security is so over the top with the Bilderberg thing, when basically some of the same players are at both meetings, and yet, I can walk into a 5-star hotel dressed in jeans and a T-shirt, sit down and have coffee, and then, put my arm over David Rockefeller's shoulder. I mean, there was no security for one, nothing. And yet here we have, particularly at Watford, I mean, the hotel was about 3/4 of a mile away from where we were all penned into this little, it was a field. It was basically a field with fences around it. And they put up this concrete wall all the way around the perimeter of this hotel, and all this rubbish to make you believe that there were snipers in the bushes or whatever trying to get at these guys, when nobody would need to. As the other meetings they go to every year, I'm sure somebody could find out where they were, and if they had that intention, they could carry it out. And it's just that it points to being kind of deliberate, a deliberate distraction.
It is a distraction. I mean, right now you've got some of the biggest transformational systems getting pushed through right now. Well, actually signed into law right now. Like the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and of course the amalgamation of the whole Atlantic countries and so on into the same system as well through the so-called trade treaties, which encompasses all of your laws of the land to give up sovereignty. That's all part of it. That's what they're like. The EU is the same thing. And to get into a super parliamentary system, or international governance as they now call it, where corporations have the big say as well. Private business has a big say, not small private business. They want them eliminated, but big corporations are the new feudal overlords. And so we're going through that right now, and there's very little coverage at all of the Trans-Pacific Partnership as people keep prattling on about the Bilderberg Group. Meanwhile, out of the 29 chapters, that's all we're told about the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Out of the 29 chapters, only 5 deal with trade. The rest of it's to do with austerity, global taxation, and carbon taxes for all energy products and so on. Everything you use supposedly takes up energy and carbon, or gives off carbon and takes up energy, and you have to pay for it and pay. And all your spending money that you normally have is gone on essential goods and services only. And that's austerity as they bring you down. That's all in that Trans-Pacific Partnership Treaty. And some of the big players have prattled on right now about we're in the most critical phase of all, right at this moment, to get all of these treaties signed into law and implemented into law right away. And that's been completely ignored by an event which tells you that what they discuss inside is secret. Whatever they hand out to the press to publish afterwards could be rubbish, as you well know, nonsense, and probably is. And the whole important things that are happening that affect everybody in the world and their entire future through all these international treaties that are secret in this wonderful democracy they keep pushing, is kept quiet altogether and bypassed and ignored by the media. So yeah, you're right enough. It's a bit of a red herring, in fact. If they didn't want the Bilderberg group ever to be known about, you'd never have heard about them in the first place years ago.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say next. I mean, at Watford, they made a point of driving the likes of Hillary Clinton and people who were clearly recognisable through the front gates of the hotel. But of course, there was a back entrance where the vast majority of the vehicles must have gone, because there was only maybe 4 or 5 vehicles came in every day through the front gate. And as I say, they were all clearly recognisable figures, and that in itself was deliberate. So that people could wave their placards at them and think that was going to change the world. But in terms of the other meetings, how do these relate to the Bilderberg? As you say, like these guys just turn up at the Bilderberg to shake hands and introduce each other, and possibly, I don't know, do the top guys bring people there they think are worthy? They bring them in to introduce to the other guys before they actually get any kind of idea of the bigger picture.
Yeah, I think actually that when they bring them in, it's true enough. You always see the future prime ministers and future presidents getting picked in advance, and they simply go there to show off their faces to their bosses, or some of their bosses, and that's really how it is. It's a formality. It's the end formality, basically. The deal's been signed. We'll put you in as prime minister or president in 2 years' time, 3 years' time, maybe even 5 years or 8 years' time. They literally tell them many years in advance and groom some of them for their positions for maybe 10 years in advance before they supposedly get elected for the general people to believe. But that's how it really works. That's how the world really works, and it's always worked this way. Many books were written about introducing this idea of democracy well over 100 years ago by the elite themselves, saying they'd give the people a form of democracy. In other words, you'd be allowed to vote for who they present to you, and you needn't really know anything about them except the PR spin they'll put on the person. And you vote for this guy or that guy, and give them parties like opposites, because people like opposites to vote for. Whereas in the Soviet system, you had simply one party. It was a Politburo, or the Soviet Marxist system, and you had number 1, 2, 3, or 40. So there's no opposites to vote for. That was the only difference. But they still call themselves a democracy because you're allowed to vote. That's all democracy means. For those who don't know that, that's what democracy means. You're given a vote, but you're not allowed to choose. Actually, say we want to put this guy up there and make him president one day. That's done by special committees, as you well know. And these committees, of course, belong to the elite themselves that choose who's going to be a prime minister or president, or even the chancellor of the exchequer for Britain, etc. These guys are chosen well in advance. And just simply put in front of you. Most important people, in fact, for big agendas like the TPP and even for the NAFTA agreement for North America and so on, are the guy who's put in charge in their federal government over all the bureaucrats who have to type it all up and deal with it all and so on, are generally appointed just for that task out of the corporate society, big corporations. And put in there for that task. They're not voted in at all. So these guys who really run the world aren't even voted into this sham of democracy, but they're certainly put in place to run it for a while. That's how simple it is, really.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of the alternative media, I mean, they're actually feeding into this thing and trying to garner credibility. I'm talking about the more well-known people in the alternative media, if you like, getting the inside track on what's going on, getting the list a couple of days before anybody else, and all this kind of rubbish. And they feed into or should I say, they feed the people that listen to them this myth that this is the be-all and end-all, This is where it all happens.
Yeah. As I say, most things that really affect us all are really carried out quietly by people who are unelected. For instance, there's that, I've mentioned quite a few times, that Jeffrey David Sachs, in the US. He's an American economist, big banking boy, the whole bit. He was director of the Earth Institute, Columbia University, which is a kind of a hub for sustainability and all these things. He's been advisor to Russia. He was put in charge of democratizing the ex-Soviet Union into the modern age, and gave all the big scam that went on there, where they had everything belonged to the state, the people supposedly, and they were going to give them all shares and all the big factories. And well, this guy gave all the shares and everything else to his cousins, actually, and a lot of different people like that. And they become the big moguls in the Soviet Union. They got everything for nothing, these multi-billionaires with oil industries, diamond industries, and everything. But anyway, he's also in charge of lots of departments within the United Nations. He's professor of the Sustainable Development, Columbia School of International and Public Affairs, professor of health policy for the World Health Organization and the Columbia School of Public Health, advisor to United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon on the Millennium Development Project, and they're now changing that. This is what's been done quietly too right now. It's been changed quietly from the Millennium Project into the Complete Agenda 21 for sustainability. So Millennium Project to alleviate poverty is now into world sustainability, depopulation, complete austerity, world taxes and all the rest of it, which ties in completely with the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the Transatlantic Partnership and so on. All the partnerships are coming together right now to push this across the whole planet. And he's just come out and said, he never even mentioned the Bilderberg meeting, but he said basically, well, 6 months to save the world, because these big meetings are on right now. They're important to get all of these global taxation and austerity projects ran through right now. And he's unelected, remember, completely unelected.
I was going to ask, do you think the Bilderberg group was ever intended to remain secret, or do you think it's been a gradual process whereby, as you say, they've got all these things ongoing now that they need to get through, and they've brought Bilderberg to the fore so that everybody takes their eye off the ball?
Oh yeah, that is part of it. I've no doubt about that. Back in the 80s, I remember, the Bilderberg were first mentioned by, it may even be the BBC or something. It was in a British television, it could be STV. And again, I think the meeting was at that time in Austria as well. And the only thing that was mentioned, that really drew attention to them, was the massive security in the typical Austrian kind of Germanic fashion of overkill, basically. And that's what impressed the punters at the time. That's when they first mentioned that at all to the public. Otherwise, no one would have known about it at all. But remember, too, there's a whole side issue set up by counterintelligence called conspiracy movement. It's run at the top by the guys who already run the world. And it's counterintelligence by diverting you, knowing that people will eventually start asking lots of questions. Give them the leaders, give them a conspiracy movement, and they'll start asking all the wrong questions because we'll point them to the wrong things. It's a diversion, as we say, rather than see the whole big picture of what's really happening. And as I say, the papers are written by Jeffrey David Sachs and people like that. The big technocrats that help run the world on behalf of the global elites. There's definitely a global elites, but there's always been a global elite in all ages and civilizations and empires and all the rest of it. So that's a hard thing because of the brainwashing that everyone's had in the modern age, is to cut through the nonsense that's been drummed into you about democracy and we'll all have a say in things and so on. It's a hard thing for them to accept in this day and age that there is a global elite and there are big cabals. You just need to look at the IBM meetings for the next year that they've set up across the world, And every major international corporation, from your drinking water corporations, which are privatized today, to those who own the road systems and are buying them up privately that used to be owned by the public, supposedly, and everything else that was supposedly owned by the public, they're all attending everything that affects everything, every part of your living today. The global food corporations with the agribusinesses, they all attend the IBM meetings. So, and including all the top professors that helps to set, and they're told what kind of agenda to set for the curriculums to teach and indoctrinate the future students. They all attend these things, and none of these folk are elected into any department of government. You understand, what is democracy? Democracy should be where it's like a plebeian vote on everything that matters to you. You'll never see that. Never see that. You know.
No, well, they try to make us think that's something that's coming in the future with electronic voting, but of course that can all be rigged. But as can any.
Well, the other thing too, here's the con of democracy, and Plato and the ancients knew all this stuff too. They tried it all, over and over. China even had it long before the Greek civilization. They tried all these systems, and it always ends up in a form of what appears to be communism for a while, and then revolution again to overthrow that. But the fact is, what they've always known is easy to convince the majority of the public to vote for how you want them to vote by the techniques of persuasion. It's very easy by public relations, this incredible technique of pushing a one-sided story by the use of words, psycholinguistics, neurolinguistics, etc., and constant repetition by important people. It's going to be important people, and people will listen to important people who are made to be stars for you to follow. They'll believe them, and they'll put their own intellect in a few pars lower than this important person. Even if it's an actor or actress, that's why they grab them. They see Farr Burr and George Clooney and other ones to be representatives for them, to get the cattle, the ones who follow the stars, to believe what they say on a political level must be true, so go along with what they say, simply because they're a star. So you can always get folk to vote the way you want them to do, the vast majority, that is. It's simple, it's very simple. Unfortunately so.
Yeah, I mean, the one of the more surprising ones I saw at the CFR was a nice big photograph of Jerry Adams. And then you think, oh, Jerry Adams at the CFR, what's going on there, you know?
Yes, and a big article came out too, just recently, about Jerry Adams' involvement with the British intelligence agencies all through the whole IRA period, etc., etc. I mean, it's just astonishing to see that one side ran both sides as usual. And
you mentioned Chancellor of the Exchequer earlier on, and of course George Osborne's at Bilderberg again, allegedly. Yeah. Although, I mean, it amazes me that people take this list of attendees at face value. I mean, nobody's got any idea who's there. I mean, they can make up any list they want, and as you say, there could be other meetings taking place somewhere else, and all these people are over there somewhere, and everybody's at Bilderberg trying to take photographs of people who are never going to turn up. But it's amazing if you talk to ordinary people in the street and you say, do you know that George Osborne's at this private meeting with bankers discussing what next level of austerity to impose on you? They just seem to think, oh, well, that's just the way things are. They don't seem to grasp the illegality of it, for a start. For any politician to be discussing domestic or foreign affairs with private corporations in secret.
Yes. Again, as part of the techniques that the many of the world players at the time, in the mid-50s, say, and 60s, said they would introduce as a form of weaning the people away from an idea of rights and freedoms and into a system where they would be taught that they have the proper system, the real natural system like gravity of democracy, but at the same time they'd be dualistic, doublethink, where they'd accept that special, superior people run the world, and they'll sit back and let it happen, thinking, yeah, I vote and I do my bit, and that's all I have to do. And the special people that come out of special wombs will take care of all the big problems. It's a form of serfdom to an extent. Serfdom has never left. Charles Galton Darwin, in his book The Next Million Years, he said, we are in the process, this is the 1950s, he says, we are now in the process of creating a more sophisticated form of slavery. Now, most folk hear that and it goes in through one ear and out the other, and they can't quite grasp what it means. Well, you stop and say, well, what is slavery? Slavery can be a bunch of people who are simply kidnapped, put in a slave gang with slave masters with whips, and forced to work. Or you can have the serfdom system, where the people were trained through religion at the time, which augmented it for agriculture and so on, to simply work the land and live in a little hut which they never owned. The land was owned, everything was owned by the lord, the feudal overlord. And most of the produce was taken by the feudal overlord as well. And he was getting a little bit for himself and his family to feed on. And that was it. And then, so they simply upgraded it into a form where, well, instead of having slave managers and overlords with armies that can force you to do things, we'll make you think you're free and we'll give you a wage. So you have what they literally called, quite openly in economics courses in the 1800s and 1900s, they called it wage slavery, where you work and you'll feed yourself by these little tokens you're given. And any extra tokens you had left over, they'd tax it back from you and use that to actually hire other little serfs to do certain other works, like build up aircraft or militaries or whatever it happens to be. So that is a system. You're looking at a more sophisticated form of slavery, where even the United Nations has stated that a good global citizen is a good producer and consumer. If you're just one or the other, you're not a good citizen. That's why they're going after the elderly now with euthanasia, etc. You've put in the money, you've taxed it off you through your working life, and the money to take care of yourself, they don't want you to use that as simply a consumer once you retire. So they want you to simply have a disease and die. They'll bump you off. And that's actually underway right now under different names for the same thing. And all the money that was put in to look after your health and so on is simply taken by the elite again, as always. It's a more sophisticated form of slavery where the slave himself will think he's free. It's beautiful, and it works awfully, awfully well. Technically, I mean, if you take the value of any currency today, the purchasing power of, say, 1 unit, say it's a pound or a dollar, the purchasing power of what it's worth, what it can buy physically, is about 1/50th of what it was about 60, 70 years ago. And you know, at one time you could buy tins and tins and tins of coffee, like a case of it, for $1. Today you can't get a cup of coffee for that, and folk think that's normal. And it keeps getting worse and worse and worse until you end up like peso or lira. You get so many millions to get a cup of coffee. They think that's normal as long as they get this little pay raise, which doesn't quite keep up with the cost of living and the devaluation of your currency or the purchasing power of that currency. It's amazing that millions of people across the world, billions actually, believe this is quite normal because they don't look into it and ask, why is it that way? They literally don't ask that. And even growing up, I'd ask people, they'd mention, oh, I've got a pay raise coming in January or something. And I thought, yeah, but the cost of living's gone up so much. I mean, they never questioned it. They simply saw their pay raise as a little prize, a carrot on the end of a stick, that they'd won something. And yet the taxes went up higher than that. And today, actually since the 70s, it's gone up like crazy until you really are going into austerity right now. And folk don't want to believe it themselves. Bertrand Russell, a big global player who worked on the future society, creating it and setting it all up with institutions. He worked at the United Nations, the Mason Group and so on, the Frankfurt School, for education and basically the brainwashing of the whole populations through education. He said that. He said that they have to train the people to have the right mindset for the generation they're going to get born and brought up into through the educational system. That's all been done. And the folk don't question things. They simply think it's all normal because they're born into it and their parents will think it's normal too. It's astonishing to me. And as I say, I grew up asking people that, even uncles, and I couldn't believe it. When you brought it up, well, why does the cost of living keep going up? There's nothing to stop saying, for instance, if you could live on £1 note, or $1 a week in 1900, at the bottom level, you could live for a week, and pay for rent and everything else, and food and so on. Why isn't it the same today? Why isn't it the same today? You know.
Yeah, I used to think of a pay rise as catch up, because by the end of that year, I was kind of thinking, I need that pay rise now to stand still, and that's always the way it was.
And it's been more and more noticeable. You're running backwards, even with the little pay raise. It's been more noticeable, and increasingly so about 1980 or so. Yeah.
In terms of Bilderberg and I'll say the job that the alternative media is supposed to be doing. I imagine that the people who are organising Bilderberg right at the top are sitting back and thinking, well, we don't really have to do anything to promote Bilderberg. We've got all these people out there waving placards doing a great job for us. They're publicising it for us, and then we can put anything out in the media that we want, and people will accept it because they've heard of it now.
Yeah, everything's a handout, and even the Bilderberg afterwards, they put a website up to tell you who they claim is going to attend. And afterwards, they hand out through attendees little handouts that they give out to say what they were talking about, which could be absolute rubbish. It doesn't matter, does it? But again, nothing matters about that, because most of the press today sits in an office and hopes each day to get handouts given from all departments, corporations, and governments, and so on. And they reprint it straight into the papers. That's what the media's job is. And from various meetings in the Trilateral Group and so on, CFR, the Rockefeller, who was a big player, his family were chosen to be the big player way back in the early 1900s for the US. He was the guy who promoted the CFR and became the chairman and so on. He thanked the press eventually after one of the trilateral meetings. He says for not disclosing for attending, but not disclosing to the public what they're all about. He said we could have done it without you and kept it all secret. So the press's job was to know what not to tell the public. Yeah, that's what their job was: what not to tell the public, and what the elite wanted them to tell the public about, not just what they talked about, but the implementation of certain things and so on. The press is part of the establishment, always has been part of the establishment. Even in Canada, the top guy for the National Post of Canada, the big newspaper, he's at the Bilderberger right now as well. What's he doing there? You know, is to get his little orders for Canada, because Canada's going to go through a massive change with austerity that's coming in big time. The top members of the top banks, the Royal Bank of Canada, are the Bilderberg meeting right now as well. So we know there's something big going to happen with Canada, and we know eventually they want Canada to be amalgamated under the NAFTA agreement, which is also into the Trans-Pacific Partnership. They want them melded into the whole North America, actually the whole of the America's continent. That's what the NAFTA agreement really is for. One system of banking, basically. So that's why the top bankers are there. And these top bankers aren't the top bankers. They're the appointed CEOs, as you know. They're not the owners. The guys who own all the top shareholders are the owners of all private things. And if you went into IBM and Google and Yahoo and everything else that matters to the average person in the street, you'll find the top shareholders are the same people right across the board. Across the whole world, that is, as the same shareholders who hold the massive shares, the controlling shares.
Yeah, it's amazing when you if you speak to people and you say, you know, that this Bilderberg meeting at the heads of media corporations, Google, you know, whoever, Yahoo, New York Post, Washington Post, whatever, have been going to these meetings for years and you've never heard about it. Right. You know, and they'll say, well, if there was something going on, they'd tell us. They say, but they were there and they denied it ever existed.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
But what do people really expect, though? I mean, you only expect to be told if you really have swallowed your indoctrination that you live in some open society. You've never had it, and you never will have it. And you'll always be taught to believe in the reality that the proper people have designed for you. And you will believe it properly once you're indoctrinated. And that's what it's all about. Yeah. Why are they in shock? Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's funny, but you know, they'll complain later down the line when they've, as you say, their cost of living's gone through the roof, and they're paying £10 or $10 for a loaf of bread, and wondering why. And we say, well, this was all decided such and such a meeting, but not necessarily Bilderberg, but something else, whether it's be I suppose something akin to the Lima Declaration meeting in what's it, 1975 or so.
Yeah.
Those types of meetings, they're the important ones that nobody ever hears about.
They never hear about it, no. And in fact, when government simply, because the government's a front, that's the whole point of it all. You can't have a great con unless you have a front that appears legitimate. And government is simply the boys who are hired by the elite and put in place to pass things into law on behalf of the elite. And when you're abused, I always say this, it's an abuse system you live in. The abused victim is trained through abuse to turn to the abuser when they're in trouble. And so when the cost of living goes up and everything else, and it's all been rammed through laws and so on and taxation by your own government, suddenly there's a group that stands up and says to the government, please help us, make some... Well, it's exactly what the abuser wants you to do to get the next part of the agenda through. That's how the whole system's controlled. I've always said the system you live in has all these what appears to be safety departments for you to go to complain, and they'll help you. It isn't until you really need all these departments or any of these departments you find out the tools they give you to save yourself are like rubber mallets or rubber picks and shovels. You try to use them and they bounce off the road. They don't really exist as the way you're trained to believe in them. There is no complaints department in the real system that runs the world.
It's almost kind of like a global Stockholm syndrome, where everybody's going back to the abuser. And in terms of the Bilderberg group, do you think that's going to be more and more normalised, and it'll be put out that these are the guys that can save the world?
Oh yeah, because as I say, the publicity has been given by what really is the authorised conspiracy movement. Unfortunately, is designed to and people believe it. They think, you see, understand, the elite always say before a big move, if we make this move and have all these different think tanks working on them like a chess game, we make this move, what will happen to the public? Well, grassroots movements might set up and start complaining and do something. And okay, in that case, we'll get the grassroots movement set up already in advance with the leaders. That'll be the leaders for the people who want to complain. That's what they've done all along, you understand. And that's how you control the masses. You always anticipate the fallout from anything you're going to push through which are going to affect people, and they're going to start grumbling and not be very happy. Give them the left wing, the right wing, or the conspiracy movement, or whatever you want to call it. And even the term conspiracy movement was labeled and put out there by the CIA through their linguistics department, so that the term will eventually discredit people who are simply putting out all the facts, or as historians. That's how, they always had troubles from certain people down through the last 100-odd years who simply followed facts and wrote books about it. So now they've created a conspiracy movement. So you start talking about facts, now you're lumped in with space aliens and all the rest of it. That's a beautiful counterintelligence system.
Yeah, I mean, down the line, we know they're trying to get rid of the national government, so they've more or less done it. The guys, the Camerons and Obamas of this world are just the talking heads for these guys. So, I mean, eventually down the road, do you see the likes of the Bilderberg group, which is North America, Europe, and the Trilaterals dealing with the Far East, all amalgamating to this one group, which will basically be this global government, behind the scenes at first, but eventually come to the fore.
It is already here. In their own writings, they say it's already here. The organisations like CIGI in Canada run through a university and a big think tank system, massive funding from foundations and all the rest, all the usual stuff. I mean, foundations are simply the front vehicles for delivering the cash and the know-how to set up the infrastructure for all these think tanks and so on that work on things. But CG has already published stuff like that. They call it, it's a global thing for international governance based in Canada. And folk will hear the term, what does that mean? Do you get to vote for international governance? No, of course you don't. Did they expect you to even ask that question? No, they know how far gone most folk are. So international governance is where all the top corporations that hold all the key elements for your very survival, food, water, everything, energy of all kinds and so on, they're the new form of governance, you see. That is governance with all these different departments across the entire planet. And the Royal Institute for International Affairs has a department in every country now across the planet. And the non-Commonwealth countries are called CFRs and various other names. There's even ones for Japan and so on. And China too, by the way. There's members of it in China. So the so-called enemy and the communists and so on. No, they've got them across the whole planet. And these guys are the big movers and shakers that do meet. There's 365 days of the year across the planet, furthering their goals. And at the top of it all, the inner circle, they call it the inner party or inner circle of the Royal Institute for International Affairs, at the high group, they have the control that keeps control of all these different organizations. And literally there's thousands of them. It shows you how big the control system is for them all to be under control. They're not independent entities at all.
Yeah, so I suppose the normalisation of Bilderberg and who knows other groups being brought to the fore will normalise that whole concept of this global governance to the general public. And I think right now people wouldn't give a damn if somebody stood up and says, right, we're going to run the world, and that's the end of it.
Well, actually, the people have been trained, as I say, into this dualistic thinking. Yeah, we live in democracy, we can vote for folk, and that's it. That's all you do is vote and then go back to sleep. That's your duty. That should tell you that. That's your duty to vote and then go back to sleep, basically, because that's what folk do. But most folk also do, but as I said, they've been trained to believe it. The special folk who are raised to a star system. I mean, there are members like Bryant and so on, and Brand that have created stars out of scientists, not just stars out of pop singers or whatever it happens to be. The same technique is made to put scientists on top and top economists that are made into stardom, and people follow these things. Oh, and your own intellect kind of shrinks and shrivels, and when you hear the name, he must be right, he's a genius. Who tells you he's a genius? Well, they tell you he's a genius. You understand? That's how simple a technique of being subservient is, to convince you this person's a star, a genius, etc., and you believe it. So you allow him to make statements. We must do this to save the world, must do that to save the economy, must do that. And you just, well, he says so, he must be right. I'm just little old me. It's so simple, this technique, and it's done deliberately. These guys are no brighter than the average person. In fact, most of them are just simply psychopaths who catch on to the cons, and that's why they're picked to go up there and con the public.
I could never understand why they got these, as you mentioned yourself many times, experts on TV to tell us how the economy should be run, but none of them has ever done it. They just talk the talk, and they don't work.
Personally, I'd abolish, and I remember, again, back in the 80s in Britain, I think was it Man Alive they had there? I can't remember the expose program they used to have on television, or 20 minutes. I can't remember what it was called. But
World in Action or something like that? World in Action?
It was something like that, yeah. And they had I think a book had come out or something written by a bunch of economists or ex-economists, whom were professors and so on. And they said the whole science of it is an utter fraud. It's not a science at all. And they went through why it wasn't a science, etc., etc. Never mind the fact the average person should figure out for themselves. If you get umpteen degrees as experts running countries and economies, how come your banks plunder you? At least it's actually getting more and more. We used to be twice a century. That was the normal for the last few centuries. Now it's more per century. And how come the government doesn't see anything happening with all these panels of advisors and economists at the top? They never see the sudden dip, they call it, and the cost of living just skyrocket. How come you can keep calling them experts, I mean, would you go and see a surgeon like that when most of the time he's wrong, and he cuts off the wrong leg. No, you wouldn't. But these guys still get up there, and the PR that comes out over the television, which really is a magic eye that goes right into your brain and implants what they want you to see and believe so easily through TV. And he comes on with his business suit on, and he's got that air of superiority. And he babbles something you can't quite follow, and once you can't follow it, it's, oh, that's above me. He must be truly a genius. He's talking nonsense. If he was an expert, he'd have seen all these crashes coming and what was happening, and it wouldn't have happened in the first place. But it happens all the time. So the whole bogus science was exposed on that program in Britain years ago by I think it was about 10 guys they had on, professors and ex-top economists. They said the whole science was a fraud.
Yeah. I mean, anybody who runs a household, say, knows how to run the economy of that household, and it's no different running a country. It's just on a bigger scale, and there's more people making a success at running their own households. Even under the present conditions, than there are politicians who have any idea about.
Or any government. And why does any nation have to keep borrowing money from private banks? Why?
That's the question I keep asking people as well, and they can't answer it.
And the trillions they tax out you through hidden taxes every darn year and all the rest of it, and their income taxes and so on, and yet they're always broke, and they need more and more and more. And folk, and they'll never come out and tell you why. It's to keep a feudal system alive. They don't want folk getting up there into a middle class with different ideas and so on, and rising up. They want to keep you all down there as peasants, basically. That's why.
Okay, we've got a few minutes left. Just to finish on Bilderberg, do you see it when the normalisation? I was half expecting a press spokesman to come out over the next couple of years. It's not happened yet, but I'm sure that's down the line. And maybe at some point they'll allow some people in to ask questions and all the rest of it, and make it even more, in inverted commas, transparent. And do you see it getting to a point where they say, okay, we've done our job now, we're going to hand over the reins to this other group we're going to set up, and it's going to be a completely different name, and the Bilderberg group is just a thing of the past, and we'll move on from here, kind of thing, as a process towards this open conspiracy.
Well, I'll tell you what they did with the globalization, when they were signing all the different globalization deals, and students for many years now have been going and protesting them, because anybody who protests generally is done through university professors who encourage their students to go and protest. It's always been that way. Even when they're pushing communism inside the US, it's through the professors who then indoctrinated the students, so they don't have any ideas of their own. They're simply told what to be angry about and what's all wrong with the world. But the fact is, they actually showed you one of the meetings they had. I think it was out in British Columbia years ago, in Canada, as they're signing all these globalization deals. And all the top leaders were there and so on. And they're looking down from a big, tall tower, and you see all the masses of people and protesters below in the streets. And they had cameras in there already, and they said, it broadcasts into some of the TV stations. And when the guy says, yeah, we'll have to start bringing in certain spokesmen for the people, the agitators down there, the protesters, and bring them on board. That's what they call it. They bring you on board, that's the term they use. And eventually you'll have authorized ones. You can probably guess who we picked from what's called the Patriot or the conspiracy movement to get in there and be brought on board to tell their followers what's going on in there. When it has no future use, basically, that actual meeting itself.
Yeah, and of course we've got Russell Brand now, who's everybody's darling, and everybody thinks this Piper's going to lead them to some kind of salvation. He's talking about, don't vote, it's a waste of time, and then he has Tony Blair around for dinner.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, that's it.
But you understand, everything is catered, that's what I'm saying. Everything to manage the public is catered to on a scale that's never existed in the past. It's so huge because of instant communication between all the people who manage us today. It's so incredibly huge. And all the think tanks that Britain alone has, hundreds of them, working on specialized in different departments of society on behalf of the elite and how to control it and manipulate it. So you don't really stand a chance with this system until you just come out and say, it's all nonsense. The whole darn thing. Your whole view of reality if he can possibly do it, has to break free of all of your conditioning since birth and what you're told to believe is the way that's quite natural. You have to break through it and somehow, and for yourself, if nothing else, start again. And when you break through it, nothing surprises you. You see what's coming on every single level, automatically, in fact. You don't have to think about it. You'll see through all the PR things from your news and so on what's really going on just instantly. And it's a completely different world. In a sense, you understand you don't belong to the elite, but you understand how they view all the rest of the masses because you understand the techniques they're using across the board. And you don't belong to the people you just left at the bottom either, because they're still in their left-wing versus right-wing and voting stage. So you're kind of in limbo to an extent in between. But you for yourself, you have a lot of satisfaction in understanding the big game that reality is. It's a game, and it's a very well-orchestrated game upon the masses of the public. Can you imagine being brought up in a really elite, well-known family, a big global player, where they can slush around billions of dollars a day on the stock market, this one family? And the members that come to their dinner from all over the world, from governments and so on, to have dinner, and you're brought up listening to their chit-chat at the table. And you're going to special schools too. And the last part of your schooling, in fact, for the real elite, is a private education, one-on-one in their own home generally. Can you imagine the view of the world and all of reality and where the future's to go, planned to go, because all the future's always planned where it's supposed to go by the elite. Can you imagine the viewpoints you'd have on everything, and how hard would it be even to communicate to the people outside your own little circle? It'd be almost impossible.
Yeah, and of course, I guess, those types of people are victims in their own right as well, because they're not being allowed to have a normal, in inverted commas, normal human life, because they've been given this world view.
Yeah, well, they do know it. Some of them know it, and some of them have kind of touched it in a kind of analogous fashion on it in their own writings. But they also tell you how it's presented to them. Yeah, this is what you've missed out on, but look at the benefits that you personally have got and the power that you personally have. And all the benefits you have. That's how they see it themselves.
Do you want to live like them over there, or do you want to be with us? That's your choice.
Well, yeah, you don't even really get a choice. In fact, you're given the choice. Yeah, what would you take? Would you really go and commit suicide and join the ones at the bottom and the folk who are lobotomized, basically? Because that's how the elites see the people at the bottom, whose education and total indoctrination and daily reinforcement of indoctrination through media. Do you really want to be amongst the lobotomized?
Yeah. Okay. Just to finish, it's funny you were talking about being able to see things as without even thinking. There was they brought in a law here in Florida a couple of weeks ago, and touting this as a great thing that in the event of a national disaster, say a hurricane or whatever, Floridians would be allowed to take their weapons with them. Now, they didn't say anything about bullets, and they didn't say where you were going, and no doubt they would take the weapons off you when you got there. But they didn't have to come into your homes. You were going to walk out the door with your guns and hand them over, I guess.
That's clever, because you understand, during the New Orleans flooding that they had there, they sent in the military eventually, and they were around the houses that were still standing and above water, and they were taking the people to safety, but they were told to take nothing out of the house at all. And then the military went and grabbed all their firearms, you see. But that meant the military was tied up transporting these folk away from it and then searching the houses. That's more work. So this is more clever. Get you to come out first with them. So you anything you've hidden, you'll take with you, and then of course they simply take it off you once you're outside. It's quite clever, yeah. That's psychology in action, yeah.
Yeah, but they were praising that as a great idea. That's great. We'll be able to defend ourselves. Well,
yeah.
No, you won't.
Oh, no. In fact, in New Orleans, they sent in teams of military to go around all the houses and kill all the dogs. They rounded them up and put hundreds of them in the houses and literally machine gun them down. Anything like that. It was just slaughtered them. You weren't allowed to take your pets with you, Now, it's only a stone's throw from doing that to people, and believe you me, the military in all ages do what they're told. We're always giving the Nazis as the worst evil that hit the world. They never mention the Soviet system or anybody else's system, because the military have always obeyed orders, believe you me. Yeah. They're all the same.
Yeah. Okay, that's our hour up, and interesting conversation again. We've got your dates for next few months, so we'll have you back again in 4 weeks or so.
Okie doke, yeah.
Good to talk to you. And I've got a question to ask you when we go off here about something I got to. Okay, thanks very much for listening, folks, and back on Monday live with Kenny Valenzuela of Experimental Vaccines. Thanks for listening.